Hello, welcome to Paint by Blunders, and we are back. It's been a while, but we are painting the Tau Lone Spear, which I have a confession to make. I did get this on pre-order months ago, whenever it came out, and I painted him up for a video because I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to paint him like the mount, like the thing from Fallout, if you've seen the TV show that pops out the water, or the axolotl. I think that's what how you pronounce it. I'll put a picture on screen, you'll be like, oh yeah, that thing. But I didn't like how I did the leather, and where I don't really plan these videos too much, I sort of just go, put the camera on and paint, and then hopefully it comes out well. Terrible, don't do that. Always plan ahead. It'll save you time and headache, and if you don't like it, you'll know in advance. But I still liked how the mount came out, so I still wanted to get this video out. I wasn't going to, but I thought, sod it, you know, it's on the shelf, why not? So yeah, I hope you enjoy it.
So this is our primed midi, our starting point, and all I've done is use grey sear and then realised that that was running out. So if it looks slightly two-tony, it's because the only other thing I had was a Wraithbone. Doesn't matter too much, they're both, you know, similar enough for what we're going to be doing. It's just a nice solid light base. And I have not stuck down the rider. He attaches on pretty easy with a little press. But if you've already stuck him down, it's no bother. It doesn't really get in the way that much. It's just, it is just easier. So first up, we're going to look at our little creature's skin, and we're going to do Doomfire Magenta and Dreadful Visage mixed. And we are only going to be using a tiny bit of the magenta, and the majority of it's going to be the Dreadful Visage. Always reminds me of the Nivea Visage adverts. Anyway, and we're going to literally get our tone together, like our shade, depending on how bright you want it, how magenta-y. And once you get it to the colour you like, I would literally, well I did, thin this down 50% with contrast medium. And then once you're happy with your tone, you could always test it on a bit of the base, etc. beforehand. But once that's ready, we are just going to cover all of his skin. Try not to let it pull too heavy in some of the recesses, and we're just going to give it a good coverage. And the reason why, again, I always thin things down a little bit more is because you can always go back in and darken them up with a second coat. And once that's done, we're going to come in with the Carroburg Crimson. Again, I'm thinning it down. And I'm just going to come in onto the underside of the creature and just pick out some of the details that I want to have a little bit more of a reddy tint. Mainly, as I say, the underbelly and like the bottom of the feet and round his face, just to try and give it a bit more tone. And once all that's dry, this is what we're left with. And all we're going to come in with is a variety of sized dry brushes, as you can see in the background. And we're simply going to standard dry brushing technique, not much on the brush, and just lightly go over all the flesh, all the little raised areas for the time being. The reason we're doing this now is just because where we want to do it like quite fast and fairly efficient, if we clip any other details that we would ordinarily paint first, we could, you know, we could get that colour on them, etc, etc. So where I sprayed my majority with Wraithbone, I will come in first with the Wraithbone, and then I'll add a little bit of bold titanium white to it to do a second layer of dry brushing, and then just straight bold titanium white as a final dry brush. But if you did it more in grey sear, start with grey sear instead of Wraithbone. Also, if you're not particularly happy with how dry brushing looks in certain areas, you could easily come back like I am here and just define some of those sharpest edges with just a classic good old edge highlight, or highlight the most pronounced areas that are going to catch the most light. And once that's done, we're going to use Mournfang Brown, and we're going to start picking out his saddle and any of the leather straps. I've done sort of 2 thin coats on this one because it doesn't have the best coverage. Just adding a drop of water on the wet palette as well, just to help it flow. Now once that's done, we're going to start looking at the spines, and I'm just going to use Black Legion. It's got great coverage and it just flows really well. This is the fiddliest bit, probably the most time consuming, so really take your time, use the sharpest brush you have, because where it is obviously black, any misbrush against the skin really does notice, but I wanted something really contrasting against the skin, and I think it looks really good. So now we're going to start looking at some of the other straps and such. I'm just using warm brown. You can use any other brown. It is literally there just to add a little bit of contrast so it isn't so one tonal. You don't have to do this. You can use the same brown for everything. It's a good chance to use a bit of contrast brown, wildwood, etc. for a bit of speed. And then I'm just going to come through and do any of the metallic buckles, etc. with Vallejo's chainmail. These are just quick little details I'm not paying too much attention to. Another quick, easy detail, the actual cushion for the saddle. All I've done is water down a tiny bit of skeleton horde and just put a quick coat on that so it looks like a little bit of tanned leather. On to one of the final stages of the skin, which is one I thought was pretty cool. I used Vallejo's Fluoro game colour, and I knocked it down about 50%, again with a little bit of contrast medium, and all it is there to do is just to find some of the stuff around the eyes and around the sort of like tentacles on his chin and around his head, just to try and make it pop a little bit more and draw the eye. So as you can see, that is the fluorescent just around the eyes, and I put it in some of the joints and just a few select areas just to help make it pop. Now we are going to start shading this leather. Classic Agrax Earth shade, cannot go wrong. And I'm literally just applying this neat out the bottle. I'm using a slightly bigger brush than I probably should for this. And I'm letting it pool a little bit more and putting it on a little bit more blobby, shall I say. Not the best technical term to describe it, just because I wanted to try and add a bit more texture to the leather, because leather, very rarely is completely one tone. It's got full of scuffs and marks and all the nice things that we like about aged leather. So at this stage you could dot the I's and call him battle ready, but we're going to take him a little bit further, just a few highlights to make him pop a bit more. The first one is a bit laborious, and I get it, there's a lot of these black spines that we've done, and all we're going to do is come in and give them a sharp edge highlight with Administratum Grey, Fenrisian Grey. I'm going to do a little bit of a mix of the two, just because Fenrisian's a bit too blue for the warmer tones that I want, and I don't want it to be completely stark grey. So we're using the belly of the brush to just go across the sharpest of these edges with a little bit of water on our wet palette in with our paint, just to help it flow that little bit smoother for us. So next up, we're just going to do a little highlight on the brown sections. I also have dotted the eye, which I've completely forgot to video, but it's because my eyesight is terrible and I don't normally video me dotting the eyes, because I wear those lovely magnifying specs that make you look incredibly stylish when you're doing these sorts of things. But anyway, Mournfoam Brown, which is the original base colour we used before we applied Agrax Earthshade, we are just going to use that and just pick out some of the edges and put a few scratches in the leather. And with that leather highlighted, he's done. I'm not going to spend any more time on him, I just need to base him now. I'm going to base him in like a swampy theme, but obviously at this point, base him whatever works with your army. I thought quickly I would just show you how I based it. All I did was use Battle Mud from AK Acrylic, like the texture paint. Oh, look at all the gaps where I didn't quite paint under there. With Zandri Dust as a dry brush, Agrax Earthshade just to darken it up a bit, and I used Camo Shade in select areas where I knew I was going to put some resin air curing fake water, this stuff, just to make it look a bit boggy. And that's him. So we've done the mount. I decided to edit it first, so the mount's up first because that's probably the more interesting part. Onto the rider. So, warm brown for his lovely leather coat. Let's go. So there's quite a lot of webbing on the coat. I'm not worrying about going around it too much. I would rather it be all brown and then me pick out that webbing in a lighter colour with just some select edge highlighting or dry brushing if you're fairly confident with your dry brushing. And once that webbing's done, we're going to use the same Vallejo model colour chainmail for anything we want silver, and we're also going to use Runelord brass just as like an accent colour for certain metallic parts and just to add a little bit of interest. Using a fairly small brush for this, I think I'm using a size 1 here. There's quite a few fiddly little details. Obviously this gun barrel's not so fiddly, but there is, trust me. I mean, I'm not telling you how to suck eggs. No one wants to completely mess up a brushstroke and go over something they've already painted. So with that done, we're going to take an easy win and use Black Legion again. Take advantage of how well it flows and how well it covers. You could easily just use normal black. And I'm going to start picking out his straps. Essentially, again, just to contrast against that brown so it's not all just one big poo emoji of brown. It's also fairly fiddly, so I flip the model around any which way and angle just to try and get a little fine detail brush. I think I switch between a 1 and a 0 for this. So with that done, we're going to do a little quick step, which is just the stock of the rifle, and we're just going to use Zandri dust for that. It's just a tiny step, but it just helps make the gun a bit more the focal point of the rider. After that, we are going to use Agrax Earthshade, and we're also going to use Blackwash, and we're going to go over the weapons and the leather. Anything metallic we're doing in the Blackwash, and anything wood or leather we are doing in Agrax Earthshade. Onto the flesh, and we're going to use Citadel's Contrast Gut Ripper flesh. I will add a little bit of medium to it, probably 2/3 colour to 1/3 medium, and apply with a nice sharp size 1. Once the flesh is done, I'm going to move on to his spines and use Rakarth flesh and then shade it with Agrax Earthshade. So now we have the meat and potatoes done as such. I'm going to come in and start highlighting now and picking out some details. So for the brown, again, Mournfang brown, the original base colour. And I'm just going to pick out the webbing and some of the edges on his jacket. So just as a second highlight, I'm going to add a little bit of Abshanti bone or some sort of creamy tone you could use to your original base colour, just to push it up a little bit brighter. And we're just going to pick out the highest points and some of the edges. After that, we're going to come in with our base colour for our weapon stock and just brighten that up a little bit. And we're also going to be doing the spines. And then we're going to come in with our original metallic colours and just add a few spot highlights. We don't want him to be completely highlighted with the metals. Well, I don't anyway, because I want him to look like he's been out in the swamps. He's got a bit of a grubby weapon. So I'm going to start highlighting the flesh with Nurgling Green, but I will be adding a tiny bit of the Gut Ripper flesh contrast, just so it's a bit more in keeping with the original skin tone, so it isn't that much of a stark contrast. And then if you want to put an additional highlight, you can go with a regular straight Nurgling Green. Equally, if you're careful and use a small dry brush, you could just give it a little flick over with that instead. So the lenses for his telescope, I'm just going to use Frost Half just to do the, simple, effective lens. Same for his rifle. If you wanted to make the lens look a little bit better, you could do a spot point of white in one of the top corners. one little Brucey bonus for the skin, because I wasn't too happy with it towards the end, is I got wildwood and I just dotted ever so slightly a little pattern, sort of going from his temple back to his spines, just because I thought it looked a bit interesting and gave it a little bit more flavour. And this is him done. One thing that I did do that I completely forgot to get footage of is, you may not even notice, but just round his jawline and round his eye, I did a very, very thin wash of crimson just to try and put a bit of life into his face. And it's very subtle, but it does work. So apologies for not getting the footage of that. So this is him all done. I think he looks pretty good. I'm not too happy with certain aspects of him. I would have done more with the levers. I'm not too happy with that. As I said at the intro, I had this painted up weeks ago and I just didn't want to edit it. I wasn't too happy with the result, but I do really like the mount. So if anyone takes anything from this and gets something from it, fantastic. I'm happy with the mount, just not necessarily the rider and a few of the finer details. But yeah, here he is. Thank you so much for checking this out, and you know, I haven't been doing this long. I'm still very much learning. I've upgraded my rig a little bit, so hopefully I'll get some better quality videos out for you soon.